Are you woke? No, not are you like wide awake on this Sunday morning. Are you woke? That was a woke joke. Are you woke in the sense of being aware of social problems like racism and inequality, discrimination based on gender, sexuality and class, or all of the above in the case of intersectionality? Religions have shared beliefs and scriptures that help them understand how to live a better life, more pleasing to their fellow believers and their God or gods. At their worst, religions could be intolerant, excluding of those who don't share their beliefs. But these days, people are less sure of religion's so-called truths, but they are still searching for certainty about something. So if you are woke, you too share beliefs with others who are woke, probably on Twitter, not so much in church, and you may condemn those who challenge those beliefs just as vehemently as any fundamentalist Christian condemns sinners when preaching in the Bible Belt. Is wokeness a new religion? Andrew Doyle, alter ego Titania McGrath, very popular on Twitter, who's a social justice warrior. It's that's you. The secret is out.
I know.
But what do you mean? I mean, how is it a religion to think that we all have equal validity?
Right. I mean, that comes down to an idea of definitions. When the word woke was originally formulated during the various black civil rights movements of the 20th century, it was about just being aware of social injustice and particularly racism and standing up against it. Nothing wrong with that. I think if that were the case, everyone in this room would be woke, myself included. The problem is the word was co-opted about 5 or 6 years ago by a particularly intolerant, regressive brand of the social justice movement that tends to use progressive language to mask its reactionary nature. If you take, for instance, even the phrase social justice, who wouldn't be for social justice? But unfortunately, they're quite an intolerant group. And the reason I say that the woke social justice movement in its current form is a kind of religion or has a certain zealotry about it is because it brooks no dissent whatsoever. It seeks a kind of ideological purity. It's completely convinced it's got this unshakable worldview that it's correct. It seeks out heresy, and that's why you get this kind of cancel culture that we see, where people will trawl through everything you've ever said and try to destroy your livelihood. But they will do it in the name of compassion. So you have people who will attack people online, bully people. I think this movement legitimizes bullying, and people are becoming very, very nervous about what they're saying because this ideology has infected HR departments. I mean, I'm very privileged. I get to say whatever I want, and I'm not worried about the consequences of that because I don't have a boss. But for most people living in if I was still a teacher, I wouldn't be able to tweet the way I do, I wouldn't be able to make the jokes the way I do, because I could be hounded out and bullied and attacked. And I think people are getting sick of this idea that they have to watch everything they say because there are these people who are trying to seek offence. And in that sense, I think it is religious, or I think it certainly has echoes of religion, at least.
So in the sense of, yeah, sense of heretics and orthodoxy and dogma and doctrine, what about this Harry Miller case? That's quite interesting, and it has been quite profile.
But that's a good example because...
What did he say?
So Harry Miller was he's a docker from Humberside, former police officer, who had retweeted a poem that was deemed to be transphobic. And he didn't write the poem, I should say, he just retweeted it. And he was investigated by the police. And when they phoned him up, he said, "Have I committed a crime?" They said, "No, this is a non-crime hate incident." The police over the past 5 years
non-crime hate incident.
Right, the police are now investigating non-crime because they've solved all the crime, clearly. Over the past 5 years, there have been 120,000 police investigations into non-crime. So now this is a direct corollary of the woke social justice movement because they do not trust free speech. It's inherently against the idea. It believes that it's got this utopian religious notion. Do
you want to quote what he said?
Just control what people say.
Do you want to quote what he said?
What Harry Miller said. Harry Miller, when he spoke to the officer said, "We need to check your thinking." That was what was said in that particular investigation.
But Harry Miller's original thing...
I'll go for it. Yeah, what did he say?
Do you want me to say it?
Yes, please. Yeah.
No, you do it.
Well, I don't know...
I don't want to do it.
You mean the poem?
OK, I'm going to be brave.
OK, go for it.
OK. I was assigned mammal at birth, but my orientation is fish. Don't miss-species me. Maya, is that a problem?
Well, I don't think it's a particularly great thing to say, no. I mean, I think part of the problem with this whole thing about wokeness is so much is piled into
why is that not a particularly great thing to say?
And I think that, you know, the amount of time I get asked to come and talk on TV debates and radio debates about this compared to the amount of times I get asked to go and talk about, say, racism on university campuses or the number of non-disclosure agreements used by universities. There is a big... this is so blown up in terms of...
I would love not to have to talk about this stuff, but unfortunately it's...
I mean,
no, I would love
how
to...
many times are you going on TV to talk about those non-disclosure agreements that are used in universities?
Because I feel compelled to. Because we're people being arrested and investigated for things they say.
Experiencing racism. Like,
that's why.
The problem here is so much of this is distracting away from actual things like structural racism that people are
Wait,
talking
you don't think
about
it's a
and trying
problem
to
that people are being
deal-
arrested
deal-
for what they
deal
Which we
with.
have discussed,
And
Maya.
I think that this is just blown out of proportion.
Which we have discussed, and we're just discussing this. We discuss all sorts of things, and we just happen to be discussing this for the next 20 minutes. If you'll bear with us.
Do you not think it's a problem,
I'm
though?
interested in this particular example. You said it's not a great thing to say. I was assigned mammal at birth, but my orientation is fish. Don't misspecies me. It's not a great thing to say, but it's okay to say it, isn't it?
No. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Anyone?
I don't have an issue with it, but then I know what he's trying to do. He's just a bully, and he's trying to be funny. What our question is with saying things like that is whether he would go up to people's face and say it, or whether he would say it in front of people's families.
He didn't actually say it. He retweeted the...
You know what he was doing.
It's a retweet, was it?
Yeah. And obviously what he's doing is he's expressing a scepticism about gender self-identification. Now, that's a debate that we need to be having, and the reason why people are resorting to what you perceive to be bullying tactics is because we've shut that debate down. You've seen it even in the...
Where's the evidence to shut down?
Well, I'll give you the evidence.
We have these individual cases, and then it's said that there's a
Can I just give an
issue.
example of how it is shut down? In fact, the Labour Party recently has said... The Labour Party has recently said that they will expel people if they want to have a discussion about this issue and they smear them as transphobic. That, to me, does strike me as a shutting down of a conversation.
Back on that?
Who is it? David, go on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you've just said before that woke is about bullying this and bullying that, but then on the other side you say perceived to be bullying. So it's very interesting that you see this woke culture as bullying, but then when I say that that person was being a snide bully online, you go perceived to be bullying.
Yeah,
Which
but
is it?
I think it's about
No,
perception
it's
on
either
both
both
sides.
perceived to be bullying or it's both bullying. You can't have it both ways.
Well, no,
Andrew.
because those are different
And you
situations.
said earlier that you would not want to be in these debates. Your career's based around that.
No,
so please don't say...
That's not altogether true, is it?
Let me finish. Yeah. You've said that, I would love nothing more than to be not here. Well, then why even set up the account then?
Do you want me to explain that?
Yeah, go on.
Because I do care about these issues. I would like to be able to talk about other things, because I think there are very important things, as Maya rightly said. Yeah?
Which we do discuss, but we're talking about this. Go on, Andrew.
I think to suggest that it's not important that a new ideology has infected law, the arts, the media, government, that actually seeks to silence people. If you're suggesting
This is what
Okay, let me just cool it down and
correctness.
take it away just for a second, because obviously it's not a great thing to say. Maybe it's not a great thing to say, but people who think it's not a great thing to say not great things about the people who say it. And that's one of the points about this. What about the Diora? What about when we have a conflict of rights? This is the interesting part. Gay rights against religious rights. People of religion who think homosexuality is wrong, and LGBT people, or some feminists against trans rights, or vegans against religious slaughter. How do we resolve that within this universe?
I think, just like we have seen in this discussion that just happened, the definition, we have to go back to it because it has become so blurred, right? Wokeness is an umbrella term for a lot of contemporary issues within our society, like you mentioned, cancel culture, identity politics, things like virtue signalling. But let's look at the etymology. So, as you rightly said, the phrase originated within black communities fighting police oppression within America. So the term to be woke, to stay woke, is to be aware of the institutional oppressions around you. Now, that term has been commercialized by big brands and it's been weaponized by right-wing media. And unfortunately now we have this word that it's become so blurred that conversations around this are very circular, and even the word woke, it is enticing so much emotion and anger that it's becoming really polarized. But to go back to your point in terms of...
But everyone's concerned about rights, and everyone's concerned about people's validity. Okay, the phrase is, people's lived experience.
Exactly.
There are conflicts, aren't there?
To talk about the rights, I think to even question whether wokeness is a religion or some kind of cult is to undermine the real concerns within the most vulnerable of our society.
Sure, but what about my question? There's vulnerable, the people who are LGBT are vulnerable, people who have confirmed and very, very passionate religious beliefs are. What about that? Gay rights, religious rights, some feminists against trans rights, vegans against religious slaughter. There's a long list. We have a problem there of a clash of rights, don't we? How do we deal with it?
I think people who have lived experiences of oppression probably do have more grounds on to talk in terms of talking about it.
But gay people feel they're repressed by religious homophobia, and we've seen that in Birmingham, and then there are religious people who think that they're repressed because they can't talk about what they feel about homosexuality.
They should be allowed to talk about it.
At a time when we need to be having more discussions and not less. The reason why I make the comparison with religion is because there is an intolerance to having a discussion. That's all I'm saying. I think you're absolutely right to pick up.
But I think it's a conspiracy theory.
Well, no, but we can see it happening.
But it is. I think it's a conspiracy theory because if it was a problem of free speech, we wouldn't be having one of the most right-wing governments in this country. The same wouldn't be happening in America. People like Piers Morgan and people like Lawrence Fox and Toby Young, all of these people are given the platform every single day.
But
so how are we talking
no one's
about
denying
free
that they've been
speech?
given a platform. You're confusing two things there. You're talking about right-wing governments, and then we're talking about the culture war, which is about the way that we model ourselves in society. Those are two different things. In fact, wokeness, if we want to call it that, or this social justice ideology, has in fact infected the Conservative Party as well. So it's nothing to do with right and left. That's a complete misunderstanding.
I want to speak to James, who's here. Now, Adam, you're looking quizzical about all this, so don't think I'm not going to come to you. So, James, you would not be classified as being woke, would you? Because you have been targeted, you're not considered woke, you feel that your anti-abortion views... Are you going to come with Emma today? She can't make it. Hope she gets better soon. You feel that your anti-abortion views have been shut down because they are unacceptable views. Tell me more.
Well, I think just listening to the debate this morning, there's some wonderful points that have been made. And it strikes me that the vast majority of people are actually really up for having a discussion about all these different issues, whether it be abortion or whatever else. And this is a particularly sensitive issue, so you really have to talk with compassion when you talk about it. But unfortunately, there's a minority of people, especially on campus, who are, I suppose, very dogmatic in their views and want to shut down anybody who disagrees with them. And this is not the majority. Most people are very reasonable, and I'm sure everybody here is very reasonable to discuss these
I won't
things.
go that far, but, but I know what you mean. Yes, most people, absolutely, most people are. What experiences have you had in people trying to shut down what you want to say?
Sure. So I work with students in Durham, and back in February we wanted to put on a discussion event to talk about abortion and the ethics involved there, and typically, you would expect a small number of people to attend these things, but some members of the student community who were particularly angry about this found out and promised to come and storm the event and shut everything down. And there were many of them who were very, very angry about this. And eventually, this caused such a stir that about 100 people came to this event, and they actually were all very respectful and. Huge disparity of views, but really engaged. But outside the event, there was about 40 students who were just screaming abuse at us the whole time. And I think it would be wonderful to see more dialogue and just that compassionate discourse going on, which unfortunately for a minority of students seems just to be beyond us at the moment.
Maya, do you agree with that?
Do I agree with
what James just said?
Well, I think that these things do need to be discussed, but the point is that often we look at these individual cases and then we say that this is a massive issue.
But it's
across
quite common
society.
on campuses,
and I think,
isn't
well,
it?
I work at a university, and what I find is actually, when I was teaching in the university, we had really challenging conversations. A lot of the texts we were reading were challenging people's conventional ideas about the world, and so I think it does a real disservice to a lot of universities and a lot of work that goes on in universities to say that we are just mollycoddling students and we're not having some of these really difficult debates. That's often not the case, and I think that it is treated often as this, there are a minority of people, and this is then blown up into a much bigger thing. And it is people touring around universities, TV studios saying, I don't have the right to, you know, I don't have the right to say what I want anymore.
So it's just people touring TV studios?
Well, no, but if you look back at the history of the debate, what you find is that these were some of the same things that were said about the political correctness debate in the 60s and 70s. People said they couldn't say what they wanted to anymore, and it was mob rule. And actually, it was not an accurate reflection of what was happening.
I can give you another example. I think you made some very good points. I have a friend in the University of Nottingham who's a nursing student, and she was recently barred from her course simply for holding a pro-life philosophical view. And this is actually legal discrimination, and eventually that ruling was overturned, but she'd missed so much of her course that she had to intermit and skip that year. And I really think this is not okay. People should be allowed to hold whatever views they want and still participate in discourse and university, and then we can have these productive discussions.
And Shireen, as an academic yourself, I mean, the sex and gender debate has amplified the acrimony that we sometimes come across. Do you know academics or people in your experience who have been targeted because of their views?
Yes, I certainly do. I mean, I think we need to distinguish between trans rights and people being committed to the rights of transgender people to live free from discrimination, oppression, which all the people I know who've been targeted hold that view, but they don't necessarily agree with quite a new proposition that gender identity, which is somebody's internal sense of whether they're male or female or both or neither, that should be the only marker used by society to categorize whether someone's a man or a woman or a different gender. And for people who are questioning that, and academics want to question that from all sorts of different perspectives. You know, we have philosophers questioning that
They're not allowed to
proposition.
sometimes, are they?
Well, that can get shut down. So I had a rather similar experience to James. I organised an event at the University of Edinburgh last summer on women's sex-based rights. Now, this was an event for women to talk about how we move forward with women's sex-based rights if we can no longer talk about biological sex. If biological sex has become irrelevant, or legislation and institutions are moving towards making it irrelevant, how do we protect women's sex-based rights? So that was the question that a panel of women were assembled to discuss. And normally, a bit like James, you would expect a small audience. I mean, in the run-up to that, we had the most horrendous 4 weeks being targeted with insults, some in very dehumanizing language, hyperbolic assertions about the harm that it would do on campus if this debate was to go ahead. There were protests that one of the speakers was attacked. And this is quite common. This is not an isolated debate. I know of this happening in other university campuses. And on my campus, there have been many events, public events, I counted 10 last year, platforming gender identity as the sole way forward. And those weren't protested at all. We had one event on sex-based rights, which had heavy protest, and another that I tried to organise towards the end of the year is indefinitely postponed because of the protests.
Yes, and that is at the very heart of our political debate at the moment, that particular issue. Who in the audience feels that they are constrained in what they can say for fear of being attacked? Anyone? Specifically that question, not just to make a point, but that question. Are you still on for answering that question?
Well,
do you feel constrained?
I feel constrained.
What do you want to say?
Well, I think a lot of it's with, I would say, social media. If I have an opinion or a view, it's easy for people to sit at home and say what you're thinking's wrong, this isn't right. And then people get supercharged, and like the events at the university, that carries over into a mob mentality. So it's
pylon, as they call it.
A pylon, yes.
St. David's, yeah, a pylon. Sarah, hi.
Hello.
How are you? Welfare and Equality Officer, Newcastle University Students' Union. Obama was talking about this recently, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, when he said he was slightly disparaging of wokeness, and he used the word, he embraced the term and criticised it, and what his quote was, man, he was sort of saying, characterised this as an attitude, man, did you see how woke I was? I called you out. Was he right to...
I don't particularly agree with what Obama's saying. I think there's an issue, a little bit of a generational gap. I think there's two issues with wokeness, and I think there's a particularly targeted attack against young people being political activists. And I think we're talking about extreme. Obviously, no one should be violent, and I understand that there is the people in a sort, I guess, who identify as woke, who are violent and inappropriate, and I don't agree with that. But I also think we're not looking at the other side of it, which are the people that are so anti-woke that they're silencing voices. Like you said that you don't feel comfortable about saying anything. I don't feel comfortable about being open and being vocal and being a political activist, because I know that people come up to me and say, you're woke, you're a snowflake, you're this, you're that. And that's silencing my voice. And I think a lot of students feel like that, and they feel like they can't speak up, especially as someone of colour. I think I know a lot of students who are also of colour, and they feel like now that the biggest thing facing them is racism, but they don't know how to speak out about it because everyone's saying, oh, you're just being woke, you're just being a snowflake, racism doesn't exist anymore, whatever. So the biggest problem facing us is a way of censoring young people.
But are we right to debate these issues? Because you don't solve problems or resolve issues by suppressing views,
exactly,
do you?
And I think it's right to debate it.
Shireen feels views are suppressed, James feels views are suppressed.
I think it's right to debate it, but I don't think it's right to kind of homogenise people into a cult or into, because there isn't a set amount of people in this movement.
Andrew.
I think that's, I don't think you're wrong. I would completely agree, and actually think it's very damaging to just label an entire generation as snowflakes and say, because actually, and I also agree with Maya, I think these are minority things that only happen every now and then, but when they do happen, they're very serious. And actually, I mean, I speak at a lot of universities about this, a lot of young people are as sick of this as anyone else, and of course, they've got the added burden of being completely smeared as snowflakes as well. I think it's a minority group of people who have a disproportionate degree of clout, and they can. I'm not talking about. I think criticism is not silencing someone, by the way. I think criticising and ridicule and that kind of thing. That's not. I'm talking about people who literally silence, as in they call the police, or they set off fire alarms so people literally can't speak. That's the kind of behaviour that I'm talking about.
David, quickly, yeah. Mia in a second.
Put this in context. I do anti-racism work. Done it since 2002. Published a book in 2010. I've had threats on my life. So putting off fire alarms, for me, I don't think it's right, and I understand where you're coming from, but the anger that you express about not being allowed to speak, my life's been threatened. My girlfriend and I had to split up because it caused a massive issue. So when I hear people say, oh, I couldn't say this because someone set off a fire alarm, I was worried that I might not be alive. And that happened twice.
And that's wrong as well.
Hang on a minute. First time I ever did any anti-racism work, do you know what the first email I got? You're an N-word loving Jew. I'm a British guy from Manchester who grew up, brought up as a Catholic. So when I hear some people saying, oh, you know what, I tried to speak at this event and I wasn't allowed and they shut it down. Try doing something like this and try dealing with the threats on your life. And I'm not saying there aren't so-called woke people who do that, but when I hear you complaining about, oh, this wokeness, it's such a nightmare, try doing anti-racism work, and then you might know what it's like.
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I similarly have had threats, and they good.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So Nikki, this is the kind of compassion that I'm talking about.
No, he's not.
From the supposed anti-racist.
We can therefore talk about this and have a shared experience, whereas people were talking about fire alarms.
But nobody was saying that a death threat is acceptable. Absolutely no one has suggested that.
But they were suggesting that somehow it's infecting the thing.
Just let Andrew respond, then I'm going to come to Mia as well. Passion, no doubt about it. Andrew.
Well, all I'm saying is nobody is suggesting that those things are obviously abhorrent, right?
Yeah.
But so is attempting to silence someone through recourse to the law. That is also abhorrent, and one doesn't mean that you can justify the other. That's all we're saying. We're just saying, by all means, criticise and make your point clear, but we're just saying, let's have an open and honest debate so that people don't feel that they can't explore these very important, pressing issues. That's all we're saying.
Where have you been shut down today?
I haven't, but I'm not claiming to have been shut down.
No, we are having a debate.
I've literally never claimed that I'm being silenced.
Mia Fox.
Literally never.
Right, good.
Mia Fox.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm awake.
How are you? Are you awoke?
That's another question.
Roman Catholic chaplain. Is there some parallel to a belief system, a religion in any sense about this? An in-group, out-group, burning heretics at the stake of social media? Do you see anything in that?
What's really interesting is this word woke, which for me has just come into parlance in the last year or two or something, has completely evolved from its original meaning, and it seems to have evolved in the last 20 minutes as well in this room, because I'm a little bit more confused about what woke is. But from the kind of origination from it of the social justice and being awake and aware and doing something, that's a good thing. To have other people shout you down, which is really a lot of what we're talking about now.
Is that happening?
I think it is.
On campuses?
It can do. It's not just campus, it's everywhere. It's obviously the social media, everything like that. But to lump it together and sort of say it's like a religion, I think, first of all, that does a disservice to religion. But I do understand that we used in the earlier debate this morning about the word enlightenment, and some people will hijack that word. I'm enlightened, you're not. And that makes me right and you're wrong, so shut up. And
holier than thou?
Well, no, because you're misrepresenting the word holy, but I do understand the sentiment there.
I thought I got you.
Thought you did.
Adam, is there a problem on campuses?
Well, I don't see it very often. The majority of students at UCL are biology students. The biggest single course is genetics, the course I teach on. I teach race and eugenics on that course. I think that there is a huge fetishization of this, which is a very valid debate to be having. I don't see the censorship that a lot of people are talking about, especially on the right. I think students sometimes express views which we might, older, less enlightened people might consider to be a bit silly. That is the purpose of students. They should be doing that. I don't see the censorship.
Are they as comfortable with contrary views as they might be?
Do you know what? It doesn't play a big part in teaching the history of genetics, which is what most, the biggest subjects at university. By the way, fish is not a meaningful taxonomic grouping anyway. Yeah. So to compare mammals to fish is just stupid.
Well, criticise him on an academic level.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's perfectly all right, Shireen.
I agree with Adam that students need to be free to explore ideas, but I think what's happening is the shutting down of questioning, and that worries me. And I think what you were saying about, you know, woke as an umbrella term, I think we need to be careful about that, because we do want students asking questions. We do want them exploring ideas, some of which may be bad ideas, but we want them to have the chance to do that. The thing that's worrying me is that an ideology has become a dogma that's asserted as if it's an unarguable truth. And then anybody who does try to argue with that or does try to have an evidence-based conversation about where that might lead is told that they're morally reprehensible and they're a danger to others. And that's used by young people to shut down older people. And some of the university managements do find that very difficult to deal with because it's cloaked in a language of equality and
It's interesting we've gone to campuses. Diora,
Let's
quickly.
talk about campuses. Okay, so there's this idea, and we've just touched upon it. It's called woke smearing, right? It's almost like the opposite of wokeness.
Yeah.
And Nesrin Malik wrote about this. It's the idea that media and publications focus on case studies where political correctness has gone too far. So, for example, a few years ago, in Cambridge, a group of students wanted to add some non-white authors to the curriculum. Now, they didn't want to replace the authors, they just wanted to add some more. Now, the way the Telegraph reported on this, I think the headline was, students forced Cambridge to drop white authors. So the way these conversations are framed are so inflammatory.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think it goes both ways.
Thank you. And of course, Caroline Flack died recently, and there's a big push on social media that we should all be kind. I hope we do see that, but some of the people who are telling people to be kind have not, up until that point, been particularly kind themselves. So, listen, we have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for that.